Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Mysteries and Disappearances of the Week video. Well, I thought I would mix this one in here because now that it's been a few weeks since Unsolved Mysteries has debuted in a new fashion there on Netflix, I've noticed that my past videos, those associated with Mysteries and Disappearances, have gone up in views. Not only that, but it's gone up in comments as well. I do see a lot more comments nowadays associated with those videos, and so I thought I would mix this one in here to add to that series, and then also because I found this particular random entry there on the Wikipedia website, and sure enough, when I was looking at other information elsewhere, I thought it was definitely great stuff to be able to share here, because who knows, there may be that link finally found sometime in the future that'll finally solve this disappearance. It's a long shot though, because this happened back in the early 1900s, but there's always that chance. And it has to do with this. You're looking at a portrait of the young woman now. Her name was Dorothy Arnold, and essentially this video will be dedicated to her, and it'll be the disappearance of Dorothy Arnold. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the information associated with this young woman. So who was Dorothy Arnold? Well, she was someone that was born to the Arnold family, which was a kind of prominent family there in New York, and she was born back on July 1st, 1885. This was a family whose father was a guy by the name of Francis Arnold, and then he had in turn several daughters, and I think there was a son as well. Either way, though, the entire family was definitely of prominence. They may not have been the biggest family in New York, but they definitely were well known. For example, he was someone that was a Harvard University graduate, and he was working as, I think it was a senior partner within a company that dealt with expensive fancy goods. And then his own sister actually married someone in the Supreme Court justice, and then they in turn came from descendants from the Mayflower itself, the very famous ship that traveled all that way here to the United States. So definitely when it came to their social standing, they absolutely had some great prominence. And so in turn, this daughter, Dorothy Arnold, went to some fancy schools. In fact, she attended a school called the Belton School for Girls, and then she attended a college called Bryn Mawr College. And here she graduated in something called Literature and Language. I don't know if that was exactly the degree itself, but that's essentially what it dealt with. This was a pivotal turn in her life because she decided to pursue a career as a writer. When I was reading the information, I got the impression that the family wasn't really too impressed with her decision. If anything, they thought it made it seem like it was a impulse, like somebody that just wanted to do something creatively, but not necessarily something productive. And so they almost wanted to see how she could do and almost anticipate her failure. That's again the impression that I got when I was reading this information. In fact, when she wanted to set something out, like in terms of an apartment somewhere else near her home or away from her home, and she asked her father about getting that apartment so she could actually be a writer there, he in turn told her, almost in a cold and stern manner, a good writer can write anywhere, and that was pretty much it. But still, Dorothy Arnold pursued her writing career for a short time period, but unfortunately, she found pretty much little to no success. Apparently, she sent not just one, but two short stories to a magazine called McClure's. Not sure exactly what this magazine is or if it's still even there to this day, but both stories were summarily rejected. Like they weren't even considered for any type of printing. And this totally just dejected Dorothy Arnold. I mean, this was something like when I was reading the information, this absolutely just changed her entire mindset. It just happens with some people. Some people will just override that rejection and move on and try to do something better. Others will just take it so seriously, and that's the impression that I got from Dorothy Arnold. And again, her family almost seemed to be like they were expecting this because either of the odds associated with success as a writer, or maybe they didn't even think she was really that talented, but they definitely didn't help when it came to any of her own passions in her writing career. And so keep that in mind, because there's a good theory associated with her disappearance because of this rejection. But this is how the disappearance actually occurred. Sometime shortly after that particular rejection, the one that she got from McClure, she decided she wanted to go shopping. This was on December 12, 1910. And so she told her mother about that, and her mother actually wanted to join her, but she said no. Dorothy said she wanted to go ahead and just go on her own. She was going to go shopping for a dress because apparently her younger sister was going to have a debutante party. And then that way she in turn would have a dress ready to go. And so she went actually to one location first. These are important steps too, because all of this information was verified afterward during a series of investigations by not just the Arnold family, but also by people associated with the police and detectives and investigators and so on. So first she stopped by a location that happened to have, I think it was something around chocolates. I don't know if it was like the whole store was selling chocolates or if it was just a small part, but she was there at a location by the corner of 5th Avenue and 27th Street, and she bought some candy there, and some of the people that worked there recalled her being there. And then she went to a bookstore called Bernardo's, and then there she purchased a book called Engaged Girl Sketches, and the clerks there also remembered Dorothy Arnold being there. Both set of circumstances, the people that were working at those locations stated that Dorothy did not exhibit anything unusual. She just seemed calm. She just seemed joyful. She just seemed like a young girl, like in other words, a young woman, as far as just happy and content and just walking about. Nothing that seemed mysterious or anything else that just stood out. And so as she was exiting the bookstore, that's when Dorothy ran into one of her friends, a lady by the name of Gladys. And this Gladys would actually be the very final person to witness Dorothy Arnold alive, at least alive, before her disappearance occurred. They talked for a little bit, and then that's when Dorothy was telling her about her debutante party that she was going to go, and everything seemed in good spirits. Again, that friend mentioned that too, because nothing else stood out, nothing in terms of her being dejected or anything else along those lines. And so as the conversation ended, Dorothy walked off. Her friend was looking at her. Dorothy actually turned once and then twice, a second time, and before she stopped, she said goodbye one more time, like waving goodbye in a joyful manner, and then she walked straight through Central Park. Those of you that have been to New York City or live in New York City know how huge Central Park is. I've been to New York City before. I've never been to Central Park, but I've seen it from some buildings, and it is absolutely just humongous, just absolutely just a huge amount of acres there in terms of the forests and everything else that makes up Central Park itself. And so there she was walking into that thick forest by herself, and essentially that was the last time she was ever seen. Also in her possession was about $25 to $30 cash, which today comes to almost $800 or a little over $800 depending on the amount she had. Again, keep that in mind too when it comes to her disappearance. But by that evening, obviously she was never back in terms of the home. She was never back in terms of dinner. And then that's when the family realized that something was wrong. They became worried as far as her circumstances. Here's where things though take an interesting turn. Rather than, let's say, your average family wondering, what can we do? Let's call the police. Let's call investigations. Let's call anything and everyone we can to make sure that she's found. The family, again, were very prominent. They actually worried more about the fact about this news, what it would cause in terms of media attention. They did not want the media at their location wondering what happened, why did Dorothy disappear, what caused her to disappear, did they have anything to do with it, and so on. So in actuality, the family was more worried about that than their daughter's disappearance. And if you can believe this, they actually spent several weeks until they actually called the police to start the investigation. That was crazy when I was reading that information, because you would think that any family within less than a day, maybe even hours, they'd be on the phone to every law enforcement they can to try to get something done. But no, they were more concerned, it seemed like, with that unwanted media attention and about being socially embarrassed than anything else. But the family did decide to do something. The father Francis, he decided to call a family friend, a friend and a lawyer, a guy by the name of John Keefe, and John Keefe started an investigation. He in turn found some interesting personal letters. They were apparently postmarked with some foreign stamps or something else, noting that it was delivered from a foreign location. And then he also found some burned papers there within the fireplace, and it's been presumed that these were the rejection letters that Dorothy got from the McClure's magazine. So remember I was mentioning that earlier, how some people just take rejection a whole different way. And this guy, John S. Keefe's summation was that he believes that Dorothy killed herself because of her rejections, because of the papers and because of the writing career that never came true. She in turn took her own life from it. That's his theory, and then that's something else that a lot of people think of as well. But this guy Keefe spent a couple of weeks in turn with the family trying to find out what occurred. He visited jails, hospitals, even some morgues. He went to a bunch of locations, areas too, that could pertain to young women hanging about, but no, he never ever could find her. And so the family ended up hiring some detectives to also investigate. They in turn searched other hospitals. They also went as far as going overseas because of those foreign letters and postmarks that they found. They went all the way across to Europe to try to see if they could find marriage records or if they could find anything that showcases her appearance. They even looked at steamliners, like those ports that would receive boats there overseas, and they tried to see if they could match anything as far as Dorothy Arnold being there. But no, they couldn't find her, and so it was left as that. Finally, with the detectives and investigators asking Francis to finally call the police, he did so, and he held a huge press conference. And this was a press conference where he indicated everything that occurred, and he offered a reward. Today would be about $27,000 for information leading to her whereabouts. Another interesting thing I found about this press conference was when he was asked about, why his daughter left, is it because of a man, something that she was not essentially allowed to date, like someone that they forbid her to date. He in turn stated that no, he was always glad to see her with a young man, but it had to be someone who had brains and position. Those are his words exactly. He would not allow his daughter to date anyone else that did not have that kind of prominence. This played an interesting twist because, as it turns out, sometime in the short past, Dorothy was going out with a guy by the name of George Grisham Jr. And this was a guy who kind of came from a wealthy family, but not as prominent as the Arnolds. And it didn't seem like, even though he was an engineer, he was held in a high standard by Dorothy's father. And so they actually kind of secretly dated on the side, spending several weeks together, in fact, at some location that Dorothy pawned jewelry from in order to expense this trip. And so when they found out about her rendezvous, the stuff that she was doing with this guy, George Grisham Jr., he forbade her, the father did, from her going out again with him. They got the extreme disapproval from her parents. And so there's one other motivation there. People have theorized that the reason why Dorothy disappeared was because she in turn could not go out with George Grisham Jr. again. And so, like most classic tales associated with forbidden love, she ended up killing herself from that. So that's yet another theory. If you're wondering what happened to George Grisham Jr., he was actually investigated by the family, and he was, I think, brought in by some police, although I had to double check on that because I found that he was questioned by the family, and I think there was some law enforcement involved. But either way, though, he maintained his innocence. He had nothing to do with her disappearance, and he never got in touch with her, obviously, like he did in the past, but nothing in terms of the present associated with her disappearance. And even when he returned from overseas, because that's where he was being interrogated by the family, he in turn talked to the press and talked about what occurred. And then he also spent a good amount of money, thousands of dollars, in fact, in major newspaper ads trying to ask her to come home, because he in turn was also greatly agitated as what occurred to her. So this was another situation involving another person in her disappearance, like a suspect, but not too many people found too much credence associated with that. Finally, after about like 75 days or so, the police finally called it off. They thought to themselves, she's not going to be found after this long time period, and nobody has one single clue as to her actual location. They called off the search. That was much to the chagrin of Frances Arnold and also the wife, because they thought that He in thought turned that she was dead, and he wanted to find out the answer. The mother, in turn, thought that she was alive, and she wanted to make sure that she could be found alive and such. And so they spent even more money, and turns out that they spent about $250,000 within the next few weeks / months, trying all they could do to do something as far as finding what her actuality is, whether she was alive or whether she was dead. They wanted to find some answer associated with it. And over that time period, there were sightings and there were letters that were brought forth. There was a letter that looked like her handwriting, but it was surmised that it was just someone that copied stuff that was printed from a newspaper, like a picture of her handwriting, and they were doing it as a joke. There were people that were sending in ransom notes that also turned out to be hoaxes. There were people that thought they saw Dorothy, in some cases morgues. There was even one wild theory as far as Dorothy dying from having an abortion, like a secret abortion somewhere, and then her body was in turn placed into some burned area, someplace where it could just disappear into ashes, and then that's where her body ended up being, and that's where essentially why it was held so secret. But that didn't have much credence either. Just numerous rumors, numerous theories as to what occurred to her, but none of them essentially coming to fruition. In fact, when Mr. Arnold ended up dying, his will, he stated that he wanted to leave nothing to Dorothy. That's how sure he was that she was never going to be found, because he wanted to make absolutely certain that not a single penny went to her, while the mother ended up dying afterward, again convinced that there was something done, like in other words, she was alive and something could be done in terms of finding her, but the mother would never ever find out as such. And as to today, as far as the whereabouts of Dorothy, there has never been one single trace associated to finding her at all. That day that she disappeared in Central Park, waving goodbye again to that friend as she went into that big foresty area, she was never ever found. Even people that went as far as thinking that she might have drowned by accident in terms of one of the nearby piers, they went and they looked after the lake was frozen and unfrozen. Nothing there, not a single trace as to what occurred to this poor young woman. All they know is that there's multiple theories, again, associated with her killing herself because of her writing career, or killing herself because of her long lost love, her forbidden love, or something along the lines of having herself killed by accident because of the losing the baby, the abortion, stuff like that. Or there's even one more theory, I forgot to mention this, that Francis Arnold was convinced of, the father, that she was robbed, that she was killed. Remember that money I was mentioning earlier that equaled a little over $800? He surmised, in his opinion, that she was killed because of it. There she was walking by herself in Central Park, and then she was killed because of it. And then the body was just buried somewhere to never ever be found. So if you're ever in Central Park in the future, think about this story here. Somewhere there, whenever she was walking towards that location, and it was from the corner of 5th Avenue and 27th Street, as she was walking into Central Park from that location, then that's where she disappeared. So eerie. Now when you think about that, the next time you're there in Central Park, you are there in that part of history where Dorothy Arnold disappeared. But if anyone has any more information, anything else I might have missed, please post those comments below. To this day, again, there's no whereabouts of her actual disappearance or her whereabouts of where she is. Not today, of course, because even by today's standards, she would be dead of old age, but nothing in terms of any closure. But who knows, maybe that missing link might finally be found in the future. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.